It all started on a quiet morning. I had just stepped onto the land my grandfather left me, a place I thought was my safe haven. But then, out of nowhere, she came storming in, sunglasses, clipboard, anger in her eyes, pointing her finger at me, shouting just one word. Trespasser. I stood frozen, neighbors watching, police lights flashing in the distance, and in that moment, I knew everything was about to explode. But what she didn't know was that I had the one thing that could turn this entire fight upside down. Hey there folks, welcome back to HOA Max Stories, the place where we dive into the wildest and most unbelievable battles with homeowner associations across America. My name's David, I'm a rancher out here in Texas, and I've seen more HOA drama than you could ever imagine. This story? Well, it's one for the ages. Before we get rolling, I'd love for you to join this little community of ours. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, it's free, and it helps us keep sharing these HOA battles with folks just like you. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I know many of you are over 50, and trust me, I love hearing your stories too. I had barely finished unloading my old pickup truck that morning when it all started. The sun was rising over the ranch, the air was fresh, and for a moment, I thought life had finally slowed down for me. This land was more than just acres of dirt and grass. It was my grandfather's dream. He built this place with his hands, his sweat, his blood. And when he passed it down to me, I promised myself I would take care of it, protect it, live on it with pride. But little did I know, the very first day I moved in, trouble was already waiting. I was walking along the wooden fence line, looking at the old posts, planning what repairs I'd need to make. The cows were grazing peacefully in the distance. For a second, I smiled, thinking maybe, just maybe, this was going to be the peaceful retirement I always wanted. Then, I heard it. The screech of tires on gravel. The slam of a car door. And before I even turned around, I felt the sharp sting of eyes staring right into me. There she was. Karen. I didn't know her name at first, of course, but I knew the type. You can see it a mile away. The way she marched across the grass, heels digging into the dirt, sunglasses perched high on her nose like she was walking a fashion show instead of a ranch road. In one hand, she had a clipboard, in the other, a cell phone ready to dial. You, she shouted before I even got a word out. You're trespassing. I froze for half a second, then laughed. I thought it was a joke. Excuse me, ma'am? I said. This is my property. My grandfather's ranch. I live here. But she didn't even blink. She jabbed that finger so close to my chest I thought she might poke a hole right through me. Don't you lie to me. This land belongs to the HOA. Nobody moves in here without our approval. And you are trespassing. My jaw dropped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had all the paperwork. I had the deed. This ranch was never, ever, part of any HOA. My grandfather bought it before the HOA was even formed in the neighborhood nearby. But she wasn't listening. Karen never listens. She started circling me, like a hawk circling prey. Talking louder, shouting about rules and regulations and community standards. She didn't care that this wasn't her land. She didn't care that I'd grown up here as a boy, running in the same fields she now claimed were under her control. No. She wanted power. And the more she yelled, the more the neighbors started peeking out from their porches. Curtains pulled back. Eyes watching. Suddenly, I wasn't just standing on my grandfather's ranch. I was standing on a stage, and every single person around was watching to see how this show was going to play out. Karen waved her phone in the air. If you don't leave this property right now, I'm calling the sheriff. We will have you removed. HOA will not tolerate trespassers. That's when I felt my blood boil. Not because she was threatening me. Not because she was calling the police. But because she was standing there, on my family's soil, acting like she owned it, when I knew the truth. I took a slow step toward her. Calm. Steady. Looked her straight in the eyes. Call whoever you need to call, I said. Because this land, this ranch, doesn't belong to your HOA. It belongs to me. And I'm not going anywhere." She blinked. For the first time, she hesitated. But only for a second. Then she snarled, like a cornered animal. "We'll see about that. The law is on my side." Her voice was sharp, but her hands were shaking. She wasn't as confident as she wanted people to believe. Still, she punched in numbers on her phone. I could hear her speaking to the dispatcher, yelling that a trespasser was refusing to leave. She wanted them to come fast. And you know what? They did. Within minutes, I could see the red and blue lights flashing down the road. My heart pounded in my chest. Neighbors stepped out into their yards now, standing with arms crossed, waiting for the show. Karen crossed her arms, smug, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. "You're finished." But deep inside, I wasn't scared. Because what she didn't know was that I had something in my truck. Something that could end this entire battle before it even began. The police cruiser rolled up, dust flying behind it. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts, eyes scanning the scene. Karen ran up to them like a child tattling to a teacher. "Arrest him. He's trespassing on HOA property." The officers turned to me, serious faces, waiting for my side of the story. My pulse quickened. This was it. I reached down into my bag, slowly, carefully. I pulled out the single thing that could silence her once and for all. The deed. The original deed to the ranch, signed by my grandfather, notarized, sealed. I handed it to the officer without a word. He looked it over. His partner leaned in. Their eyes moved from the paper, to me, to Karen. Karen's face began to twist. She stepped back. "What is that?" she hissed. But she already knew. One officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, this property is not under your HOA jurisdiction. According to this, he's the rightful owner." The silence that followed was louder than all her screaming combined. Neighbors whispered. Karen's face turned red, then pale, then red again. She stomped her foot, shouted something about going to the board, and stormed back to her SUV. She slammed the door, revved the engine, and sped off in a cloud of dust. The officers handed me back the deed, nodded, and said, "Have a good day, sir." And just like that, it was over. Or was it? Because that was only the beginning. Karen wasn't finished with me. Not by a long shot. And the truth is, that first battle with her left me wondering something I want to ask you right now. If you were in my boots that day, standing on your family's land, facing an HOA Karen screaming trespasser in your face, would you stay calm like I did, or would you have lost it right there on the spot? Tell me down in the comments. I really want to know. The silence after Karen left was heavy, almost too heavy. The officers drove off, the neighbors slowly drifted back inside, and I was left standing there by the old wooden fence, holding the deed tight in my hand. I looked out across the ranch, the tall grass swaying in the breeze, the mountains in the distance, the cows grazing without a care in the world. This land wasn't just dirt and wood. It was memory. It was blood. It was legacy. And as the quiet returned, I felt something rising in me, a mix of pride and fear. Pride because I had stood my ground. Fear because I knew this wasn't over. You see, this ranch carried history. When my grandfather first bought it, people thought he was crazy. A man with nothing but a dream, carving out life in a place most folks thought was worthless. But he worked every inch of it, plowed the fields, built the barns, raised the livestock. And slowly, people respected him. They knew this ranch was his kingdom. I remember being a boy, riding the old tractor with him. He'd point at the fence line and say, "Son, land is the only thing they're not making more of. Protect it. Respect it. Never let anyone take it from you." And that voice, that lesson, echoed in my head that day, louder than ever. Karen thought she could scare me off. She thought a few threats and some loud words could erase decades of my family's sweat. But she didn't understand. This ranch was in my blood. I walked back to the porch, sat down, and let the wood creak under me. My grandfather's chair. The one he used to sit in after a long day in the fields. For a moment, I closed my eyes, and I swear I could almost hear him laughing. But then, that laugh turned into something else. The sound of a car. Again. At first, I thought it might be Karen coming back. But this time, it wasn't her. It was a group of neighbors. 3 of them. 2 men and 1 woman. They walked up slowly, hesitant, like they weren't sure if they were welcome. "Mind if we talk?" one of the men asked. I nodded. They shuffled closer, glancing over their shoulders like kids sneaking out after curfew. Then, in hushed voices, they told me the truth. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the president of the HOA. She had been running it for years, like a queen ruling over her little kingdom. She fined people for the color of their fences, the height of their grass, even the decorations on their porches. People feared her. Some hated her. But most just gave in, paid up, and stayed quiet. "She controls everything," the woman whispered. "And now, she's trying to control you." I leaned forward. "But my ranch isn't in her HOA." The man shook his head. "She doesn't care. She thinks if she pushes hard enough, she'll scare you away. And if she can't, she'll find another way." A chill ran down my spine. Another way. The neighbors didn't stay long. They spoke their piece, warned me, and left. But their words stayed behind, echoing louder than the cicadas in the trees. Karen wasn't finished. And I had to be ready. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept walking the ranch, checking the fences, looking at the barns. My grandfather's words kept replaying in my head. Protect it. Respect it. Never let anyone take it. The moon was high, casting silver light over the fields, when I spotted it. A car. Parked at the edge of the road. Headlights off. Engine running. And I swear, I saw her silhouette in the driver's seat. Watching me. I clenched my fists, but I didn't move closer. Instead, I stood tall, staring back across the field. If she wanted to watch, let her watch. This was my land. I had nothing to hide. Eventually, the engine revved, and the car rolled away into the night. But that moment told me everything I needed to know. Karen wasn't going to let go. Not quietly. Not easily. The next morning, I woke up to find something strange on the fence post. A notice. A letter, printed with HOA letterhead, taped to the wood. It read, "Notice of violation, unauthorized occupancy. Immediate removal required. Failure to comply will result in legal action." I laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh you let out when you're too angry to do anything else. She was doubling down. And for the first time, I realized this battle wasn't just about me. It was about everyone around here who had been bullied into silence. Everyone who had paid her fines, followed her ridiculous rules, or lived in fear of her next tantrum. This ranch had survived storms, droughts, wildfires, and it would survive her too. But how? That was the question that kept burning in my mind. Do I fight her with more papers, more law, more rules? Do I stand my ground day after day until she tires herself out? Or do I take the fight straight to the heart of the HOA and expose her for what she really is? I sat back on the porch, holding that notice in my hand, and asked myself the same thing I want to ask you right now. If you were in my boots, facing an HOA president who would stop at nothing to claim land that wasn't hers, would you keep waiting for her next move, or would you strike first and end it before it gets worse? Tell me down in the comments, because I really want to hear how you would handle someone like Karen. The morning after I found that notice, I felt the weight of the fight settling on my shoulders. The ranch was quiet, too quiet. The only sound was the wind brushing through the grass, and the creak of that old wooden fence. But in my chest, my heart was pounding like a drum. I walked over to the fence post again, the letter still taped there, flapping gently in the breeze. Notice of violation. I read those words again and again, almost laughing at the madness of it all. How could I be trespassing on land that had been in my family for generations? But the laughter didn't last long, because I knew Karen was planning her next move. I kept thinking about the car I saw watching me the night before. Her silhouette in the driver's seat. She wasn't just bluffing. She was studying me. Waiting for the right moment. And that moment came sooner than I thought. By noon that day, I heard the sirens. They echoed through the valley, bouncing off the hills, sending a chill straight down my spine. A black and white police cruiser rolled down the dirt road, dust kicking up behind it. And sure enough, right behind them, a silver SUV, hers. Karen stepped out before the police even stopped the car. She strutted across the dirt in her heels, pointing toward me like she was about to win a prize. There he is. That's the man. Arrest him, now. The officers walked up slow, steady, serious. One of them I recognized. Sheriff Daniels. A man I'd seen around town for years. He looked at me, then at her, then back at me. "What's going on here?" he asked. Karen practically exploded. "What's going on?" "I'll tell you. This man is illegally living on HOA land. He refuses to follow our rules. He's ignoring our notices. He thinks he's above the law." Her words spilled out like venom. She waved her arms, stomped her foot, even shoved that letter into the sheriff's hands. Sheriff Daniels read it, then turned his eyes back to me. "Sir?" I reached into my jacket pocket, my hand steady this time, and pulled out the deed again. "This is my ranch. My grandfather's land. Always has been. Never part of the HOA." I handed it to him. He looked at the papers carefully, his brow furrowed. The younger deputy leaned over his shoulder, nodding slowly. Finally, Daniels looked up at Karen. "Ma'am, this paperwork shows clear ownership. This ranch isn't HOA property." Karen's face twisted. Her voice rose. "That paper is fake. It has to be. He's tricking you. Don't you see? He doesn't belong here." The sheriff sighed, calm but firm. "Ma'am, unless you have proof otherwise, you're the one trespassing here. I suggest you step off this property." The air around us grew heavy. Neighbors had gathered again, standing along the fence lines, whispering to one another. They were waiting to see what she'd do. Karen's hands shook, but her mouth kept running. "You'll regret this," she snapped at me. "I'll take this to the board. I'll take this to court. You won't win." And just like that, she turned on her heel, stomped back to her SUV, and slammed the door so hard it rattled. The engine roared, and she sped off in a storm of dust. The sheriff handed me back the deed. "Don't worry about her. You're fine. Just make sure you keep this handy. She'll probably try again." I thanked him. But deep down, I knew his words were right. She would try again. And she did. That night, I found another letter. Not taped to the fence this time. Slipped under my door. This one was different. It wasn't just a violation notice. It was a threat. "If you don't leave by the end of the week, you'll regret it. HOA always wins." No signature. But I didn't need one. I knew whose hands had left it. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at those words. My blood boiled. My fists clenched. This wasn't just about rules anymore. It was personal. She wanted me gone. She wanted to erase my family's history. She wanted to stand on this land and claim victory. And for a moment, just a moment, I wondered how far she'd go. Would she try to scare me off with more fines? More police? Or something worse? The thought kept me awake that night. I paced the floors, checked the locks, looked out the windows. Every sound outside made me jump. Every shadow in the moonlight felt like her watching me. But as the night dragged on, one thing became clear. I couldn't just sit back and wait for her next move. I had to fight. Not with fists. Not with anger. But with truth. With proof. With strength. This ranch was mine. And I was ready to defend it. The next morning, I drove into town. Straight to the county clerk's office. I asked for every record, every file, every map that proved this ranch had never been part of her HOA. The clerk raised an eyebrow, but handed me the copies. Stamped. Official. As I walked back out to my truck, holding that stack of papers, I felt something I hadn't felt in days: control. Karen wanted a war. And now, I was ready for it. But I kept asking myself one question as I drove back to the ranch, the papers on the seat beside me, the dust cloud behind me. How far would Karen go, now that she realized intimidation wasn't enough? And that's the same question I want to ask you. If someone like her kept pushing, kept threatening, kept showing up no matter how many times the law told her to back off, would you keep fighting with papers and patience, or would you finally snap and teach her a lesson she'd never forget? Tell me in the comments, because I know many of you have lived through HOA nightmares too, and I want to hear your story. The morning after I came back from the county clerk's office, I woke up early, the stack of papers still sitting on the kitchen table. I barely touched my coffee, because I knew it was only a matter of time before Karen struck again. The sun was barely up when I heard the sound. Not a car this time. Voices. I stepped out onto the porch, and there they were, 4 of them. A small group standing at the end of my driveway. Not neighbors coming to chat. No. These were dressed sharp, stiff, with clipboards in their hands. The HOA board. And of course, standing front and center, like a queen with her knights, was Karen. She adjusted her sunglasses, smirked, and shouted across the yard. You had your fun. But today, it ends. The others shuffled forward, clearing their throats, speaking in official tones. Sir, according to HOA regulations, you are in violation of community rules. Your residence here is unauthorized, and we require your immediate removal. I couldn't help but laugh, a hard, bitter laugh. I stepped off the porch, papers in hand, and walked toward them. This is my land. I have every document to prove it. You people don't control me. You don't control this ranch. I held the stamped files high, the county seal shining in the morning sun. Karen's smirk faltered for a moment, just a moment, but then she straightened up. Those papers mean nothing, she snapped. We are the authority here. We decide who stays and who goes. The arrogance in her voice made my blood boil. But I stayed calm. One of the board members, an older man with gray hair, shifted nervously. He looked at Karen, then at me. His lips pressed tight, like he wanted to speak but didn't dare. That told me something, maybe not everyone was as loyal to her as she thought. I stepped closer. You want to test me? Fine. Let's take this to court. Let's put these papers in front of a judge. And we'll see who's trespassing then. For the first time, the board members glanced at each other. Uneasy. Doubtful. Karen, though, doubled down. Her voice rose, shrill, echoing across the land. You think you can scare us? You think some old piece of paper will stop me? I'll bury you in lawsuits, in fines, in fees. I'll make your life a living hell until you crawl off this ranch and never come back. The neighbors were watching again, standing far back, whispering behind fences. I could feel their eyes on us. This wasn't just my fight anymore. Everyone was waiting to see who would break first. I tightened my grip on the papers, looked straight into her eyes, and said slowly, so everyone could hear. You'll never own this ranch. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. Her face twisted in fury. She spun on her heel, muttered something to the board, and stormed back toward her SUV. The others followed, some reluctantly, heads down. The engine roared, gravel sprayed, and they disappeared down the road. I stood there for a long while after, the dust settling around me. My heart was pounding, but I felt stronger. Yet deep down, I knew this was far from over. And sure enough, that night, it escalated. I was sitting in the living room when I heard it. A loud bang on the barn wall. Then another. Then laughter. I grabbed a flashlight, stormed outside, and caught sight of 3 teenagers running off into the dark, their sneakers pounding against the dirt road. Spray paint cans clattered behind them. I rushed to the barn, and my stomach dropped. Big red letters sprayed across the wood. Trespasser. Get out. I clenched my fists, my teeth grinding. This wasn't random kids messing around. No. This was her. This was Karen, pulling strings, sending a message. I took a deep breath, stepped back, and stared at those words glowing in the flashlight beam. For a moment, I felt anger swallowing me whole. But then, I remembered something. My grandfather used to say, land can be marked, but it can't be stolen. Not if you stand tall. And so I stood tall. The next day, I painted over the barn myself. Coat after coat until not a single red letter remained. I worked all day, sweat dripping, arms aching, but when I finished, I stepped back and smiled. The barn was clean again. But the fight was only getting dirtier. Because that evening, I got a letter in the mail. A real one this time. From a lawyer. It read, "On behalf of the Homeowners Association, we demand immediate removal of your person and property from HOA-controlled land. Failure to comply will result in legal proceedings." She had escalated. She was dragging me into court. I sat at the kitchen table again, the letter shaking in my hands. Part of me wanted to tear it up, throw it in the fire, forget it existed. But another part of me knew, this was exactly the moment my grandfather had warned me about. Never let anyone take your land. I folded the letter neatly, set it down beside the deed, and took a long breath. This wasn't just about a woman with a clipboard anymore. This was about a system. A system that thought it could bully people, fine them, harass them, scare them into silence. And suddenly, I realized something. If I stood my ground, if I fought her in court and won, it wouldn't just free me. It would give everyone else the courage to stand up too. For the first time, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for all of them. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, the weight of it all pressing down on me. But I wasn't afraid. I was ready. Still, I couldn't help but wonder. How far would Karen go in a courtroom, with all her lawyers and her threats, if she finally realized she couldn't win on my land? And let me ask you this. If you were facing not just Karen, but an entire HOA board and their lawyers breathing down your neck, would you go to court and fight until the very end, or would you pack up and leave to buy peace of mind? I want to know what you'd do, because your answer might just show how strong you'd stand when it's your land on the line. The letter from the lawyer sat on my table like a snake, coiled and waiting to strike. Every time I glanced at it, my chest tightened. Karen had made her move. She wasn't sending notices anymore. She wasn't hiding behind spray paint or late-night drives. She was bringing the full force of the HOA into a courtroom. And I knew what that meant: money, lawyers, endless paperwork, stress. She wanted to bury me under the weight of it all until I cracked. But what she didn't count on was that I wasn't alone. A few days later, as I was repairing a fence post out by the road, I heard footsteps. I looked up and saw one of my neighbors, the older man with gray hair who'd been standing with the board that day. He shuffled toward me, hands in his pockets, eyes darting around like he didn't want anyone to see him. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered. "But I need you to know, not all of us agree with her. Not all of us support what she's doing." I leaned on the hammer in my hand and studied him. "Then why don't you stop her?" He looked down at the dirt. "Because everyone's afraid. She finds people for every little thing. She threatens them, embarrasses them. But if you fight her, if you beat her, maybe the rest of us will finally have the courage to stand up too." His words hit me like a spark to dry grass. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was bigger. And maybe, just maybe, it was winnable. That night, I stayed up late, spreading papers across the kitchen table. Deeds, maps, county records, photographs. I highlighted every line, every clause, every piece of proof that tied this land to my grandfather and to me. The pile of evidence grew taller, stronger, undeniable. But as I worked, a thought gnawed at the back of my mind. What if the courtroom wasn't the only place she planned to fight me? The next morning, my fears came true. I woke to the sound of voices again, but this time they weren't at the fence. They were in the field. I rushed out, heart pounding, and froze. There were men out there. Workers. Strangers. Driving stakes into the ground, unrolling bright orange plastic fencing, hammering signs that read, HOA property. No trespassing. I stormed across the yard, shouting over the sound of hammers. What do you think you're doing? One of the men shrugged. Orders from the HOA. Karen said this land was theirs. We're just doing our job. I yanked one of the signs out of the ground and snapped it over my knee. This is my land. You have no right to be here. Now get off. They hesitated, glanced at each other. Finally, one muttered, "Fine, but she'll send someone else." They packed up their tools, climbed back into the truck, and rumbled away down the road. My hand shook as I stood in that field, broken sign in the dirt. She wasn't waiting for the court. She was trying to claim the land right under my feet. By the afternoon, the sheriff was back. He'd gotten calls. Karen had complained I was interfering with HOA property. But when I showed him the papers again, the sheriff shook his head and told me to stay strong. "She's overreaching," he said. "Keep your records close. The law is on your side." But the truth was, the law is slow. And Karen was fast. The very next day, I found my mailbox stuffed with letters. Not one. Not two. A dozen. Fines for unauthorized structures. Fines for unapproved fencing. Even fines for livestock violations. None of it made sense. None of it applied to me. But it was paperwork, meant to choke me, to break me down piece by piece. I sat at the table that night, the pile of letters in front of me, and for the first time, I felt the weight pressing down. My hands trembled. My head dropped. What if this was too big? What if she really could drown me in legal trouble? But then, I heard a knock. I opened the door, and there they were. The neighbors. Not just one this time. 5. Maybe 6. All standing together, shifting nervously, holding envelopes and papers of their own. "We're tired of her," one woman said. "She's been bleeding us dry for years. If you're going to fight, we want to help." They stepped inside, placed their papers on the table next to mine. More fines. More letters. More stories of harassment. Together, the pile grew taller. Together, the evidence grew stronger. I looked around at their faces, tired, beaten down, but hopeful. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a courtroom fight. This was a community fight. If I stood tall, they would too. And suddenly, I didn't feel alone anymore. The next morning, I loaded everything into the truck. The deed, the records, the neighbor testimonies, the photographs, the fines. A mountain of truth. Because soon, I'd be standing in front of a judge. Soon, it would all come out. But as I drove into town, the engine humming beneath me, I couldn't shake the question that burned hotter than the Texas sun. How far would Karen go when she realized the community was turning against her too? And let me ask you, if your whole neighborhood had been bullied for years by one HOA leader, and suddenly everyone turned to you to lead the fight, would you take that responsibility and carry it on your shoulders, or would you back away and hope someone else stepped in? Tell me in the comments, because I think a lot of you have been in battles like this before. The courthouse smelled of dust and old wood, the kind of smell that clings to history. My boots echoed on the floor as I walked through those heavy double doors, the weight of generations pressing down on my shoulders. I wasn't alone. Behind me, 3 of my neighbors followed quietly, clutching their own stacks of papers, their faces pale but determined. They didn't say much, but their presence was louder than words. We weren't just fighting for one ranch anymore. We were fighting for freedom from Karen's grip. And there she was. Karen. Sitting at the front of the courtroom in her polished suit, hair pulled back tight, lips pressed thin. She didn't look like the woman who screamed at me by the fence. She looked colder, sharper. At her side, 2 lawyers in black suits shuffled papers, whispering to her like vultures circling prey. When her eyes met mine, she smirked. That same smirk I'd seen when she first stormed onto my land. But this time, it was different. This time, she thought she had me cornered. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The gavel struck once, and just like that, the battle began. Her lawyers started first. They painted a picture of me as a troublemaker, a trespasser, a man who thought he was above the rules. They waved copies of violation letters, photographs of my ranch, and a stack of so-called evidence that looked more like a pile of lies. Your Honor, one of them said smoothly, our community thrives on rules and order. Without enforcement, chaos spreads. This man refuses to comply, and his defiance threatens the integrity of the entire HOA. I clenched my fists, biting back the anger bubbling inside me. They weren't just attacking me, they were attacking my grandfather's legacy. Finally, it was my turn. I rose slowly, every eye in the room on me. My hands trembled, but my voice came out steady. Your Honor, this land is mine. It always has been. My grandfather bought it long before the HOA even existed. And I have proof. I handed the judge the deed, the county records, the maps. The documents spread out across the bench like shields in a war. The judge read carefully, flipping through each page. Silence filled the room, broken only by the faint shuffle of papers. Karen's lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Karen herself leaned forward, her nails tapping the table, her smirk fading just a little. Then came the neighbors. One by one, they stepped up. Voices shaking, but strong enough to carry. Your Honor, Karen fined me for leaving a flower pot on my porch. She charged me hundreds for my grass being 2 inches too tall. She threatened to tow my car because I parked in front of my own house. The stories poured out, filling the room with the sound of years of frustration. Faces that had once been silent now spoke loud, and with each word, Karen's mask cracked a little more. By the time they finished, the courtroom didn't feel like hers anymore. It felt like ours. But she wasn't done. Not yet. Karen shot to her feet, her voice shrill. They're lying. All of them. They're just bitter because they broke the rules. Without me, the neighborhood would fall apart. I am the only reason there's order. Her words echoed, desperate, clinging to control. The judge raised a hand for silence. His eyes locked on her, calm but sharp. Mrs. Green, he said, her real name ringing louder than any insult. The evidence is clear. This ranch is not, and has never been, under the authority of your HOA. Your claims are without merit. Furthermore, the testimonies we've heard raise serious concerns about your leadership. Karen's face drained of color. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. For the first time, she looked small. The gavel struck once. Twice. Case dismissed. It was over. The neighbors behind me let out breaths they'd been holding for years. One woman whispered, finally. Another man patted my shoulder, his eyes wet. I stood tall, the weight lifting off me. My grandfather's ranch was safe. The land was mine. The truth had won. But as I turned to leave the courtroom, I caught one last look at Karen. She sat slumped in her chair, fists clenched, eyes burning holes through me. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't smirking. She was defeated, but not destroyed. And in that moment, a thought chilled me to the bone. What if this loss only made her more dangerous? Because some people, when you corner them, they don't stop. They get worse. As I walked out into the sunlight, my neighbors around me, the courthouse doors closing behind us, I couldn't shake the question swirling in my mind. When someone like Karen loses in court, when their power crumbles in front of everyone, do they finally walk away quietly, or do they come back twice as angry, looking for revenge? And let me ask you, if you were in my shoes, with a woman like that glaring at you even after the judge cleared your name, would you feel safe at last, or would you be watching your back every single day? Tell me in the comments, because I know some of you have seen people like her before, and I'd love to hear what you think she would do next. The day after the courtroom victory, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The air smelled fresher, the sky looked clearer, and for once, the ranch felt safe. The neighbors waved when they passed, smiles replacing the nervous glances I was used to. It seemed like peace had finally come back to this land. But deep inside, I knew better. Because when a person like Karen loses, they don't just walk away. They don't swallow their pride and admit defeat. No. They look for another way to strike. And sure enough, by the end of that week, I got my answer. It was late evening when I heard it, the roar of an engine tearing down the dirt road. I stepped onto the porch, and there it was, Karen's silver SUV, headlights glaring like angry eyes. She didn't stop at the road this time. She turned sharp, tires spitting gravel, and came right up the drive. Before I could even react, she slammed on the brakes, jumped out, and started marching toward me. Her voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. You may have fooled the judge, but you'll never fool me. You don't belong here. You never will. I held my ground. Karen, it's over. The court said it. The sheriff said it. The papers said it. This ranch is mine. But her eyes burned wild. Her hands shook. And then, she did something I'll never forget. She reached into the back of her SUV and pulled out a shotgun. The neighbors who had been watching from across the way screamed. One man shouted, "Call the sheriff." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, but I didn't back down. Put that down, I said firmly, my voice steady even though my pulse was racing. This is my land, and you've already lost. She waved the gun, her voice breaking. You think you can take everything from me? My power, my respect, my authority? No. I built this neighborhood. I control it. And I'll control you too. Just then, red and blue lights flashed down the road again. Sheriff Daniel's cruiser came flying in, siren wailing. He and his deputy jumped out, guns drawn, shouting for her to drop the weapon. For a moment, she didn't move. The world felt frozen. Just me, her, and the weight of everything we'd been through. Then, with a scream, she threw the shotgun to the ground and collapsed beside it, sobbing into her hands. The deputies moved fast, cuffing her, reading her rights. The neighbors gathered closer, whispering in shock. I just stood there, staring at her, trying to understand how it had come to this. All the power she thought she had, all the fear she spread through the community, it had all crumbled into dust in a single moment. Sheriff Daniels shook his head as they put her in the back of the cruiser. She's finished, he said quietly. She won't be running any HOA from a jail cell. And just like that, she was gone. The weeks that followed felt different. The neighborhood seemed brighter, freer. People started fixing up their yards without worrying about ridiculous fines. Kids played in the streets without being told their bikes were a violation. The community started to heal. One evening, I sat on the porch in my grandfather's chair, the sun setting over the fields. The same neighbors who once whispered in fear now walked up the drive with smiles, bringing pies, shaking hands, sharing laughter. You did it, one of them said. You stood up to her, and because you did, we're all free. But I shook my head. We did it. Together. She only had power because everyone let her. The moment we all stood up, she lost. As the night rolled in, I thought back to my grandfather's words. Protect it. Respect it. Never let anyone take it. I realized then, it wasn't just about land. It was about dignity. About standing your ground when someone tries to bully you out of what's rightfully yours. About fighting not just for yourself, but for everyone who's too afraid to fight alone. Karen's shadow still lingered in my mind. The memory of her standing there, shotgun in hand, eyes wild with anger. But that memory didn't scare me anymore. It reminded me of something stronger: victory. And as I leaned back in that old creaking chair, listening to the crickets sing, I knew the ranch was safe. The legacy was safe. And the community was finally free. But let me ask you something. If you were standing on your porch that night, and your enemy, beaten, desperate, out of control, came charging at you with a weapon in their hands, would you have stood tall and faced them down, or would you have run for cover and let fear win? Tell me in the comments, because I know one thing for sure: sometimes the way you answer that question shows exactly what kind of fighter you really are.